All right, so let's begin. Well, for those of you who came back early, here's some breaking news that there's an attack on this protocol that I put on my slides, which is the Sigma protocol. It was discovered by this amazing researcher called Karthik. So it's an exercise. What did I do wrong here? And find the bug and propose a fix. Okay. So there we go. Now let's move on to some more protocol level flaws. Okay. And particularly, we're going to talk about downgrades. So downgrade attacks, sometimes called backwards compatibility attacks, sometimes are framed as cross-protocol attacks, are all attacks that come primarily when you have an agile protocol. Okay? So a particular form of agility in the simple protocol that we have is that we might choose to extend the Sigma protocol with a Diffie-Hellman group negotiation. So let's assume that Alice and Bob both support a really nice, strong 2048-bit Diffie-Hellman group. And they also support a rather weak 512-bit Diffie-Hellman group. And you might ask, well, why are they supporting this 512-bit Diffie-Hellman group? Why wouldn't they just stay with the strong one? Well, there might be some requirements like backwards compatibility with some clients which used to do 512 bits in the 1990s, and they still have to be compatible with them. Or there might be some regulations, like the export regulations in the USA, that force you to support these kinds of weak groups in combination, in addition to the strong groups. So the normal way the protocol is supposed to work is the following. The client first sends all the groups it supports. It says, I suppose the 2048-bit group and the 512-bit group. The server chooses the strongest group that has been offered, typically, and which it also supports. So in this case, it will be the 2048-bit group. And then they continue the whole protocol as usual using the group that was chosen, which in this case, this is the good case. Everybody's happy because even though A and B supported this weak group, it never is going to get used because whenever they negotiate, they're both going to realize both of them support the strong group. They're always going to choose a strong group, and they're going to, so the protocol is just never going to use the weak group. The problem is that there is a downgrade attack that is possible from the attacker. Because what the attacker can do is that he sees that the strong group is going to the left to the right, and the weak group, the client supports both. He deletes the strong group from the first message. So when Bob receives this message, it thinks, oh, maybe Alice only supports the weak group. And he says, oh, okay, if this is a legacy client that only supports the weak group, so Bob sends back this message saying, okay, let's do the weak group. Now Alice thinks, oh, Bob maybe only supports the weak group, so Bob is a legacy server that only does weak groups. So it says, okay, let's do the weak group, and from this point on, the whole computation uses the weak 512-bit group, for which we know that we can compute the discrete log fairly efficiently, and so the attacker can actually completely break this protocol. So the problem in this protocol is that this negotiation step here was not protected. So the attacker could tamper with the negotiation step and thereby change the way the protocol is going to go, right? So we did not even include them in the signature or the MAC or whatever. So the way it actually works in TLS is that the signatures and the MACs are structured a bit more differently in order to prevent exactly this kind of tampering in the negotiation. So the TLS version, what will happen is that the first message has both groups that the client offers. Then the server sends back its identity, which is a certificate. It also sends back a signature over the group that it has chosen, along with this public key. So we saw this already in the Diffie-Hellman version of TLS. And in the third message, the client sends back its own JVX. And at the end of the protocol, if the client is authenticated, it's going to sign all of the messages above, including the negotiation. And the MAC that it's sending is also going to include all of the messages above. Actually, a hash of the messages. Let's ignore that for now, but it's going to include all the messages. Similarly, when the server sends back its own MAC, which is a finished message, it's going to MAC all of the messages up to here. Okay? So it's going to really include all of the messages in the MAC, including the negotiation, exactly to prevent the negotiation from being tampered. So here in TLS, we are macking the full transcript. So the MAC, which is going to be sent by the server, let's say, is going to contain the groups that were offered by the server client, the group that was chosen by the server, and the key exchange messages. Does this prevent the attack? No, the logjam attack still occurs. And so this is kind of something that you have to think about. Why does it still work even if we have mapped everything? Right? So let's just think about the server authenticated version here. It's kind of simpler. In fact, that's where it kind of works. So the client is sending one, the server is doing, the man in the middle is doing exactly the same thing. It deletes the strong group and sends the weak group over. B is going to sign the group it chose. So it's going to sign G to the 512. So it doesn't change fundamentally what's happening. It still thinks it's going to use G to the 512, G512, and A also thinks it's going to that B only supports G512. And A is then going to do this. You're going to compute the session key, and then you're going to do the map with a session key on the whole transcript. So you see the problem here, which is that the downgrade on the parameters downgraded the quality of the macking key that we were going to use to protect against the downgrade, right? So there is a circularity between the chosen cipher suite and the way we are going to protect the cipher suite negotiation in the first place. So here, the basic problem is that this is our main protection against downgrades, but it's too late by this point because the K that we are using is already using the weak Diffie-Hellman group at this point. So there is no protection. The attacker knows K, so he can compute the map and break the protocol as usual. And this is really the heart of the logjam attack, which is a combination of the downgrade attack along with breaking the 512-bit group in order to achieve this kind of a man-in-the-middle attack. So the lesson here is that in the protocol, the design flow in the protocol is that the downgrade protection mechanism is explicitly designed to protect against downgrade. The downgrade protection mechanism in TLS 1.2 itself depends on downgradable parameters. Okay, it doesn't depend on static parameters. It depends on things that then can themselves be downgraded. So in order to prevent this particular kind of attack, you either have to change the protocol, which is what has happened in TLS 1.3, to rely on signatures for downgrade protection in addition to max and do other things as well which prevent this attack. Or you have to remove all weak parameters. You just have to say, let's kill all the 512-bit troops from the internet, which is a hard task actually because there's a long tail of these weak parameters that they just don't disappear that easily. So to summarize, what went wrong in this particular attack is that there was a crypto weakness. Everybody knew this. 512-bit groups are bad, but only, I don't know, 3% of the world, 0.2% uses 512-bit groups, and 3% uses less than 768-bit groups. So it was a bad thing, but it wasn't so widespread. But then there was a logical protocol flaw which allowed a downgrade attack on the Diffie-Hellman group negotiation, and that basically increases the probability of attack to everybody who supports 512-bit groups, not just offers 512-bit groups. Okay, so the countermeasure for the first one is let's get rid of all the weak groups. And that's what I would say, but that's actually not what happens in practice. The countermeasure for the second one is maybe we can protect the integrity of the key exchange itself by relying on something other than the MAC that is derived from the key that was itself downgraded. So what are the ways we can improve the integrity of the handshake? Well, other protocols have chosen other steps. So you can maybe learn from other protocols. So IQV2, the signatures include more stuff. So both A and B are going to sign the offered groups. So the first message are included. Okay. In IQV2, each of them is going to sign its own message. So A is going to sign the offered groups, and B is going to sign the chosen group. So they're going to sign their own messages. And SSH2 and TLS 1.3, they're just going to sign everything. Both the A and B are going to just sign, they're going to sign a hash of everything that was sent in the message. So in all of these cases, maybe we can rely on the signature to give us better guarantees, right? So this is the IQV2 variation of sigma, which you can look at, and there's an exercise, but there is actually a variant of logjam that works on this. It's a weaker attack, but at this level, you can sort of see how the same kind of attack can appear even on this one, even though you're signing part of the transcript. And the basic lesson is that here, well, although you're signing the offered groups, you're not signing the chosen group. Here, each of them is signing their own messages, but they're not signing both the messages. So you don't, from the signature, you can't get the integrity of the entire negotiation. And in SSH and TLS 1.3, when you sign everything, yeah, from the signature itself, you can get the integrity of the whole transcript as long as the hash function is strong, right? So let's kind of go one more step. Okay, let's assume that we're signing everything like in TLS 1.3. So the signature is giving us full downgrade protection. What about the hash function that is used in the signature? Is that negotiable? Of course it is, right? So remember that TLS 1.2 introduced the signature extension, which allows you to choose SHA-2, but also allows you to negotiate MD5, SHA-1, and so on. So it turns out that almost exactly the downgrade attack I showed you before occurs on the signature algorithms extension. So the client supports SHA-2, the server supports SHA-2. The attacker removes SHA-2 from the signature algorithms and says that the client only supports MD5 and says that the server only supports MD5. So both of them are downgraded to MD5. And now all of the integrity protection you were relying on for the signature breaks because of sloth, right? So you can actually use sloth now to break the integrity protection, do your downgrade, go down to Diffie-Hellman group 512, and then you can use logjam to break everything. So you can do this whole chain of attacks basically by applying downgrades over and over again.
We talked about the IPv6 variant, but for TLS, then you're assuming client authentication if you're signing.
TLS 1.2.
1.3. You said that if you were signing everything, but only in most cases only the server has the signing key.
Right. So the downgrade I'm talking about here is the server signature includes everything. If the server signature included everything, that would be enough.
You don't need the client.
No. Yeah, that would be enough. Okay, so again, lessons learned, what went wrong here? There was a crypto weakness, we understood very well, which is sloth. There's a logical protocol flow, which is a downgrade attack. And then, in fact, even if you say that this logical protocol flow only appears for clients and servers that enable MD5, so an easy way to fix this might be to just say, please delete MD5 from your configurations everywhere. In fact, there are implementation bugs that we found that actually cause this also to be subverted, because there are implementations of TLS where you can delete MD5 from the configuration, so the implementation will never offer MD5 itself. But if somewhere deep in the signature it sees an MD5 signature, it will still process it. So just disabling things from the configuration was not enough in these cases, and this is a kind of an implementation bug. And all three of these together, when put together, cause even bigger havoc and increase the level, increase the proportion of clients and servers that are vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. Okay. So there's a second class of logical flaws, and this I'm actually going to skip because we don't have so much time. But they are in the slides, and I'm happy to answer questions about them in the break and so on. Where the basic idea is that, remember the kind of transcript collisions that we were trying to do with like very fancy hash function attacks? Well, it turned out that in slightly older version, actually even now quite popular version of TLS, you can achieve the same kind of same effect, which is a synchronization of transcripts across two different connections, but just by using the usual behavior of TLS RSA and a slightly dodgy behavior of TLS DHE. By first synchronizing the keys on both sides and then using them to synchronize the transcripts that are used for renegotiation and resumption. And that's what's called the triple handshake attack. It's basically a transcript synchronization attack that does not rely on collisions. So it's a purely logical, so to speak, attack on the protocol. Okay, skip. So the third category of bugs, I wanted to talk about the crypto weaknesses, I want to talk about logical flaws, and the third category of bugs I want to talk about is implementation bugs. So of course, when I talk about TLS implementation bugs, the first thing that you should think about, and the first thing that most people think about, is heartbleed. But that's like the most common kind of bug that's going to happen in all these TLS libraries. And in fact, just for a sense of perspective, almost everything that I'm going to tell you is maybe interesting to me, but it's way less bad than something which is like heartbleed, which is much more common, in fact. So the most common attacks probably affect more servers and clients than the fancier attacks that we're going to talk about. But there's other kinds of bugs as well. Somewhere deep inside your protocol code, where you're supposed to do a signature check, you may have an implementation bug that forgets the signature check in some corner case of the way the program runs. And this is the famous Apple go-to-fail bug, which you can look up. There's also certificate validation at the heart of almost all of these protocols. In certificates, we are talking about X509 certificates, which are in this format called ASN.1. And if you've never seen these formats or these of the certificate of the certificate standard, you're a lucky person. But it's actually a super ugly thing. But it's widely used, right? So, and it's very hard to get right. So there are lots and lots of libraries which have bugs in their parsing of these certificates, which again causes havoc. So these are kind of the most common and widespread bugs in TLS libraries. I'm going to talk about something different, which are called state machine attacks, which are going to follow our theme of saying, listen, we've got so many modes in TLS, and what happens when you put these two modes together? What kind of bad things can happen? So of course, remember we have these hundreds of different modes in TLS, which you can take any combination of these things. So how are we going to implement all of these modes? Are we going to implement each combination completely separately in a different program? Not really, right? So a library is going to have to choose a certain number of modes it supports, and it's going to have one implementation that does all of these modes. So for example, suppose I wanted to support the RSA handshake, which is this one. Doesn't matter what the details are. Effectively, what I'm saying is that my protocol has a state machine, which is something like the one on the right. It's a fairly linear state machine. I must first send the client hello, then I will receive the server hello, then I must receive the server certificate, then the server hello done. So there's a sequence of send and receive messages, which implements this particular protocol flow. Okay? And that's sort of, I'm writing it as a state machine. So it's just a sequence of messages, really. Now, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange has almost exactly the same sequence of messages with some small differences. In the middle part of the protocol, which is exactly the server key exchange and the client key exchange messages, which is on the right, the contents are different. So in RSA, I was encrypting the PMS for the server. In Diffie-Hellman, this contains G to the Y and G to the X. The rest of these messages more or less have exactly the same format. For all practical purposes, are the same messages. Okay, they're doing the same constructions. So those two messages and the key derivation which is attached to those two messages is slightly different. But if I just look at even forgetting the contents of the messages, if I just look at the shape of the state machine, the only difference between RSA and Diffie-Hellman is that there is an extra message in Diffie-Hellman. Extra message between server certificate and server hello done. There is this extra message called server key exchange. So if I'm trying to implement these two modes together in my code, I'm not going to completely have independent implementations of the two protocols, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to have an implementation that manages the first two messages. Then it branches to this key exchange or that key exchange. Once the key exchange is done, I'm going to join back to do the same key confirmation and the same authenticated encryption afterwards. So there's a little branch in the middle. So if I try to compose that state machine and that state machine, I will come up with a state machine which sort of looks like the one on the right, and that's what my implementation is going to do. I'm going to share the code for the top and the bottom, and in the middle, I'm going to have two different functions for the two different key exchange modes. This is how almost all TLS libraries, SSH libraries, IPv2 libraries, and all work, and this is how they deal with cipher suits. The branch that's happening there is based on what key exchange method we are using, and that key exchange method has been agreed upon by the server hello. For the first two messages choose the key exchange, and then the next three messages are going to do a branch based on what key exchange we're going to do, and then we're going to join back and continue on. So that's a good composite state machine for those two modes. If you add other modes that are commonly used in practice, like session resumption, client authentication, and all the features that are used on the web, you come up with a state machine which looks something like the one on the right. It's got more branches, but still is more or less fairly simple, I would say. You know, the branches are all conditioned on either the key exchange or on whether the client is authenticated or whether you're using resumption. There's about 3 conditions. You know, it's fairly straightforward. There's 2 linear state machines you have to branch between. So the question is, this is supposed to be the state machine for TLS that covers all the web cipher suits. Okay? Do implementations of TLS, like the web browsers that you're using, the web servers that you're using, are they actually conforming to that state machine? Do they implement that state machine, or do they implement something completely different? And that's a good question to ask, because this TLS standard does not specify a state machine. I have invented this by looking at the standard, but in fact, it leaves it open for the implementation to choose how it chooses to implement the composition of these protocols. It does not specify. So if you actually test this, and we did this, you test various implementations, you find that in fact there are lots and lots of violations. I'm calling them violations. Their violations means they are different. They're doing something which is different from what I believe the TLS state machine should do. So all the red arrows that you're seeing are in the OpenSSL implementation, well, up to a certain point. Now it's no longer the case, but this was in 2015. All the red ones are extra transitions that are allowed on the server, and the green ones are all the extra transitions that are allowed by the OpenSSL client. And these extra transitions means that they're allowing me to send messages in an order which I think they should not allow me to send them in. And these extra transitions typically are of two forms. There was a message which I think of in this particular key exchange as required. You must send this message, but the transition allows me to skip it. Or there's a transition which I think corresponds to a message which must not be sent in this particular key exchange, and the extra transition allows me to send it. Okay? So skipping and inserting. So those are the two kinds of bugs in the state machine. And if you look at the Java state machine, there's like a bazillion extra transitions because it's really allowing, it's almost like allowing me to go from any state to any state. I mean, it's not even worth writing it in a state machine form. It's almost like from any state you can send any message. And the reason why these two implementations still, why the design, I'm guessing why the designers of these two implementations still thought this was okay, is that, okay, suppose I receive messages in the wrong order, okay? What's going to happen? At the end of the protocol, I'm going to have to MAC the entire transcript and send it over. The other person is going to MAC the entire transcript and send it over. If they're in the wrong order, the MACs won't match, the connection will break. So it doesn't matter if we kind of allow some extra transitions here or there. By the end of the handshake, we should still get the guarantee that both of us agree on the exact transcript that has happened. And if one of us is well behaved, if both of us are badly behaved, then who cares? But if one of us is well behaved, we will find this bug at the end of the handshake. And the other reason, of course, which is the true practical reason, is that over time, TLS libraries have done lots of quirky things. So it might be the case that Microsoft Windows 95 sends two messages in the wrong order. And rather than sort of saying that, no, we're going to reject these connections, you say, oh, okay, maybe this is a Microsoft machine trying to connect to me, so I'm going to accept this wrong order of messages and continue on, okay? So the question is, when you have all of these extra transitions, is it, where do they come from, and is it exploitable? Is it an attack? Where they come from is this, which is the TLS RFC, 1.2 RFC, for example, describes the key exchange like this, right? The whole handshake like this. So this is a sequence of messages that's going to be sent, and it puts these little stars on messages which may or may not be sent depending on the mode. And if you put a star on the message, it appears like it's an optional message. But it's actually not an optional message. It's completely deterministic based on the key exchange, whether or not that message is going to be sent. But that particular state machine, which is called a ladder diagram, has confused a lot of people into implementing it incorrectly, in my opinion. So for example, this is what I think should be the right composition. But if you think of it as an optional message, you might implement a state machine like the one on the right, where you don't put a condition, and you just say, after the server certificate, I may get the server key exchange, I will try to process it. Or I may get a server key hello done, I'll try to process it. And by the time the handshake is done, maybe everything will be okay. I mean, I'll either find a bug, in which case I will crash, or everything will be okay, and this is the optimistic case. And this is consistent with the so-called Postel's principle of the internet, which says you should be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send. And this is great for things like TCP and IP, and when there is a wide variety of implementations which don't exactly interoperate, but you want them to interoperate. But this is particularly bad for security, right? Because here now, if you implement the state machine on the right, there are two bad cases, and I will discuss both of them. One is that you're running a DHE handshake, and someone has not sent you the server key exchange. And the second thing is you're running an RSA handshake, and someone does send you a server key exchange. Okay, so there are two bad cases and two good cases. The two good cases we don't worry about, but there are two bad cases that could happen here. So let's look at this one. In the DHE exchange, we require that server key exchange message because it contains the server signature. That's where I'm getting the server authentication from. So it's actually a mandatory message. Without it, the protocol just doesn't work. So let's look at what happens in Java. So up to 2015, if any of you ever used a Java client to connect to an HTTPS server, and in fact, the PayPal SDK provides you a Java SDK. So many merchants who were connecting to PayPal were using Java HTTP to connect to PayPal. this is what would happen, right? So the client is trying to connect to PayPal. The attacker intercepts this connection. And instead of letting it go to PayPal, he sends back a server hello, sends back PayPal certificate, which is public, anybody can send it. And now he has to send the server key exchange message, right? But he cannot send the server key exchange message because he doesn't have PayPal's private key, so he cannot sign, he cannot create a signature. So what he does, he skips the server key exchange message, and since the state machine allows me to skip it, I go through to the next state. So at this point, I'm supposed to send a server hello done message. But if I send the server hello done message, the client will start doing the client key exchange, will try to compute the pre-master secret, and things could go bad. So let me skip that message too. And in Java, since I'm allowed to skip a lot of messages, I can skip that. So now I'm going to have to, the client is not going to send any of those messages because it is waiting for the server hello done. So it doesn't know what's happening, so it's still waiting. So it doesn't send any of the next messages. So effectively they get skipped. So at this point, the next message that the server can send is the server CCS message, which means let's turn on encryption. But we skipped the entire key exchange at this point. So there's no key. So how can we turn on encryption? We don't want to turn on encryption, right? Because we don't have a key. So let's skip that message too. So we have bypassed encryption, but we can't bypass the last step because at this point the client is still waiting. It needs something to tell it it's done. So the last step is the server finished message. And the server finished message, we've turned off encryption, so we don't have to encrypt it anymore. But it includes a MAC. And that MAC has to include the transcript of everything that was sent before, which is just the first 3 messages really at this point. But I have to include a MAC of that. But I don't have a key, and there's no session key here. I've turned off encryption. What do I use for the MAC? Well, in Java, if you initialize a buffer and you're waiting for a key, it's full of zeros. So you can use a MAC key of all zeros, and you can compute a MAC and send the server finish message. The client will say, okay, this looks like a good MAC, accept it. The entire handshake has been bypassed. We just did negotiation and went straight to finished. And at this point, the client starts sending application data to PayPal, which is unencrypted even because we turned off encryption, remember? And even if it was encrypted, it would probably use the keys of all zeros. And which means that the entire beautifully verified protocol, AKE in the middle, was completely bypassed by this sequence of bugs, right? We just kind of followed each skippable thing, used one other bug about an uninitialized memory or zeroed memory, and then we are done. So at this point, we have completely taken over the connection between any Java client and any TLS server, including whatever, anything you can think of. And this was a bug that existed in all versions of Java up to 2015. So we went back and looked for all versions. This has been always the case. Okay? Yep. I hope not. We waited until they issued the update in January 2015. However, colleagues of mine who are security consultants who do consultancy for various Java applications tell me there are still a lot of Java servers out there which have not updated their Java clients. Apparently, Java is like one of the most widely used implementations on server-side applications, and also for server-to-server communications, because both of them are doing Java, so they will do this. And apparently, some of these servers have been running non-stop for years, and they have these special ways of just kind of keeping it running while they update certain features of the application. So they can't afford to stop it to upgrade the Java because they don't even know, because the developers might have left, whether it will start again. So
It's the client, the Java client, that's the problem.
Indeed, but when I'm talking about servers, I'm talking about like a merchant, like whatever, I don't know, Amazon connecting to PayPal, right?
So Amazon connects as a client.
As a client to PayPal, even though they're both servers, it's a server-to-server connection. But since all the servers, a lot of the servers are written in Java, they are just going to use a Java HTTPS URL connection, just a new HTTPS connection to connect to a Java to Java.
They are also very efficient.
That's right. So this is a very, very efficient protocol, yes. Okay, so that was a obvious bug, right? I mean, it just allowed us to completely bypass the protocol. But again, it's instructive as to say, where are the bugs coming from, and why, after we do all this analysis and proofs, are there still bugs These are the kinds of things that often go wrong. But in fact, things go wrong sometimes in a combination of ways. Yeah?
Was that found by manually looking at the code, or was it by some automatic analysis?
So what we did to find these kinds of things was a very crude form of fuzzing. So we had a spec. We actually built our own implementation. I was going to talk about it at the end of the day, but maybe I won't have time, so I might as well say it right now. So we built a verified implementation of TLS, which is called MeTLS. It took us like 3 years to build, and all of the state machine, we kind of were trying to verify all the properties of the state machine. It was very painful for us to verify this protocol correct. And we finally did it. We kind of struggled to publish it. Then we published it. It went quite well. And then we worried. We looked at it and we said, well, it was like 4 or 5 people, 2 cryptographers, so long to verify our implementation. Surely these guys who are out there are not paying as much attention to that implementation. So let's test whether they're doing the same thing as we are. So we used our implementation as a specification to test the other implementations as to what they were doing in the protocol. And that's when we discovered that they were doing lots of things which are different. And this is kind of like the diff between ours and theirs. And the way we did this was, and this is kind of a very cheap way of testing protocols. And you should do this at the very least, right, for your own protocols, which is to just generate the valid traces of a protocol, the ones that you think are good, and then use them as a starting point to generate all possible invalid traces of the protocol and try those too, because that's kind of more important in a certain way for security protocols to test invalid traces than to test valid traces. You can feel very happy that your protocol, your client connects to Google, but you also want to make sure that it does not connect to Google with 2 E's or 2 O's. Right? You want to make sure that the negative tests are covered as well. So we ran a bunch of negative tests against these various implementations and found tons of bugs.
If you don't implement it as a state machine, if you don't put the right gates in the right places, it's actually not. It's not really bad because it was not implemented from the first place.
That's true, which is why whenever I talk about this as, I call them unexpected transitions. I don't say this bug. I'm saying
Exactly.
this was
logical. It's logical.
Yeah, it's logically, I don't know where this is
Look at
coming.
the gates on the states.
So I can fairly confidently say that if you had found those unexpected transitions, but not found attacks, like concrete attacks that break the connection, none of this code would have changed. Okay, they would have said, yeah, but it's our way of implementing the state machine, your way is different. But
Karthik,
yeah.
so what's done in the TLS 1.3 to prevent kind of implementation issues?
So TLS 1.3, well, so there is the good news and the bad news. So the good news is that the state machine in TLS 1.3 itself, because of this amazing design called the key schedule, is very linear and it kind of is uniform across different cipher suites, and so has less chances for needing these unnecessary branches. And cryptographically, since you're hashing continuously the next keys with the transcript, there are many more places where the consistency of the transcript is enforced even within the key derivation. So that's the good news. If you're using various modes just of TLS 1.3, most likely you will not see these kinds of bugs. I don't have a proof that this is the case, but we have an implementation which looks much simpler when you're just doing TLS 1.3, and it's sort of easier to prove. Okay. Now, the trouble is, of course, that TLS 1.3 for the foreseeable future is going to be run in parallel with TLS 1.2. So when you compose TLS 1.3 with 1.2, in fact, this composition is even uglier because the protocol has changed so much. So in fact, there are more branches now than there were before. So the composition of the two might in fact require even more attention than before. But if you're just doing TLS 1.3 and you can afford to just delete TLS 1.2, then actually it's very clean and nice. Okay, so let's take one more look at an attack. But this time, see how you can combine a bug like this along with the other kinds of flaws that we're looking at. Yeah, and this is kind of a message I'm hammering home in the first 2 hours, but this is exactly what I want to kind of for you to take away, which is that there are multiple kinds of flaws that appear in protocols. If you find any one of them, of course, you can immediately suggest how to fix them. But when many of them come together is when really bad things happen and people start paying attention. So let's look at this, go back to RSA now. So this is your RSA key transport. We looked at it before. Remember, there was an encryption going on, and we said in theory this relies on the hardness of factoring PQ into P and Q. So let's look at factoring. So this is your records for RSA factoring. And again, we believe that 768 bits might be broken or has been or may be broken this year or very soon. But at the very least, 512-bit groups are completely broken. Okay, and how long does it take to factor a key? Well, here's an estimate again from Nadia. If you take 512-bit keys, it took about 7 months in 1999, but right now it takes a few hours on an Amazon cluster. For a few dollars, you can break a 512-bit RSA key. Okay, so this is like some rough numbers from a couple of years ago. The numbers might have gotten better. Okay, so what if you can factor the RSA keys in TLS? Right, so RSA encryption is used only up to TLS 1.2. TLS 1.3 does not use it. And if PQ can be factored into PNQ, obviously an attacker can immediately figure out what the PMS is, can read past messages, can break into connections, and all of these bad things can happen. And let's just assume, let me just take this, even though 768 hasn't been broken yet, let's just say all keys up to that size can be factored. So browsers right now will reject any RSA certificate that has less than 1024 bits. They were supposed to move to 2048 bits this year, but apparently there are enough servers that are supporting 1024-bit RSA that they've had to postpone it a few times already. Because the standard rule for browsers, for TLS, for the internet, is that if you make any change, you can at most break some percentage of the internet, and that percentage is very, very small. So it depends on who you are. For Google, if more than 0.5% of connections are getting broken, they will already not make that change. Okay. In many of these cases, 2% to 3% of connections start getting broken, and that's no for everybody. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why if 1% of the internet continues to use 512-bit keys, they will continue to be supported in many of the existing browsers. Okay, so let's assume that because of this, at least 1024 still looks okay. So nobody should be using 512 bits for sure, right? But that's not the case because of the strange piece of history, which some of you might be aware of, that in the 1990s, way before most of you in this room were born, I guess, there were these things called export-grade ciphers in TLS. So what happened was that at that time, cryptography was considered like munitions, like firearms. So they were subject to firearm regulations. And the US, they decided that anything above a certain security level should not be allowed to leave the country. Now, this was obviously not going to work, and in 2000, everything was revoked. But in the 1990s, there were these laws. Yeah.
Just to correct, in 2000, they relaxed the export. It's still a weapon.
It's still a weapon.
Everybody here
Right?
is still working in.
We are all still working in munitions, right? Yeah. So actually, the regulations are still ambiguous, but they stopped being enforced for sure in 2000. So because of this, early versions of various browsers, including Internet Explorer, Netscape Navigator, and so on, used to have two versions. I remember going and downloading the export version because I was in India, because that's what I was allowed to use from India. But if you were in the US, you would download the good version. So every server, like eBay which was one of the first ones, would have both a strong key, which it could serve to US customers, and a weak 512-bit key, which it could serve to customers from abroad. Okay, because of course, people are connecting from all over the world. You still had to support them. So Diffie-Hellman and RSA were limited to 512 bits, and symmetric crypto was limited to 40-bit keys. So it was like pretty weak. And at that time, already the NSA knew how to break them, is the assumption. That's why they limited it to those ones. But whatever. We don't know why exactly those numbers, but they're considered to be very weak already in 1999. So because of that, even TLS 1.0 includes a number of these ciphers which have this word export in them. They're in all caps and they're very kind of easy to spot. And in a way, they're like the danger mark, right? Because these are only for export regulations. They shouldn't really be used. They shouldn't be confused with regular RSA or regular DHE. They're export RSA and export DHE. And to support this, everybody had to maintain two keys. So even now, many OpenSSL servers will have a 2048-bit key for regular use, and they will also have a 512-bit RSA key that they generate at startup time and keep in their memory, just in case somebody contacts them and asks for an export cipher suite. Okay? And similarly, most of them will have a 1024-bit Diffie-Hellman group and a 512-bit Diffie-Hellman group. So in 2000, export was deprecated. In TLS 1.1, it's already said don't use it. TLS 1.2 doesn't even mention it. It's not supposed to be used. But there is still dead code in some sense in most TLS libraries. And in 2015, when we did an analysis, about 26% of the internet still allowed you to connect with an export cipher suite if you want. They will never choose it, but they will allow you to connect with export cipher suites, including about 10% of the top million servers. Again, this is backwards compatibility, old features which refuse to die, right? And modern browsers, of course, will never ask for RSA export. So this should be roughly okay, right? So this is your RSA. So, okay, let's look at what export does. So RSA handshake, this is the RSA handshake. We looked at it many times before. The export handshake is slightly different. In RSA export, the server it has a 512-bit public key, right, which it has generated at startup time. It's going to sign its 512-bit public key and send it over to the client. And then the client is going to encrypt the PMS against the 512-bit public key. So this is almost like an ephemeral RSA connection. So in fact, if you were to design an ephemeral RSA handshake, this is more or less what it would look like, except that you wouldn't use a 512-bit key, you'd use a stronger key. So that's the only difference in export. And really, they look quite different. So normally, in export, there is a server key exchange, which is going to have the 512-bit key, whereas this one, so this composition, again, we come back to the same kind of thing, should have a branch there that says if you're export, you will go there. If you're not export, you go to the other side. However, most TLS libraries, exactly like in the skip attack that we saw, do a bad composition here and allow export key exchange messages to be injected into regular RSA key exchange messages. So this is part of the bugs in all of these libraries, and the same kind of bug which leads to a downgrade and then a cryptanalytic attack. So what is going to happen is that the client is going to say, like your Chrome browser until 2015 is going to say, I support RSA. The attacker is going to delete RSA and instead going to put RSA export. So the server thinks that the client is asking for an RSA export handshake. The server sends back saying, okay, we'll do RSA export. And the man in the middle changes it back to RSA. So the client still thinks it's doing 2048-bit RSA, which was considered reasonably strong at the time. So then the server sends the server certificate, which is fine, as usual. Then the server sends a server key exchange message, which is unexpected. Because if the client is doing RSA, it shouldn't be getting a server key exchange message. But there's a bug, the state machine bug, where the client does accept the server key exchange message and silently switches from RSA to RSA export, switching the key from the public key of the server to P512, encrypting things for P512 and sending it to the server. The moment this happens, if you have broken the public key of the server, which you can just by doing pre-computation on the server's 512-bit key, you can completely take over the connection. Okay. So what's happening here? There was a crypto weakness, which is RSA export. We accepted that if you use RSA export, you're in trouble because 512-bit keys are dead. We added a downgrade attack based on the signature ambiguity, or this where the signature that the server sent did not really tell you, or the macking that the server did not really tell you whether it was using RSA or RSA export. It wasn't strong enough. And that was most importantly an implementation bug where the client was accepting the wrong message in the wrong protocol. And the three of them put together caused you to break about 25% of the internet, which is what the freak attack was about. So here's a summary. So what have we learned? We learned that there are real world attacks that we are worried about in things like TLS and other protocols like this. This is not just about TLS. Although a lot of the most high profile attacks you'll find are in TLS, very similar logical flaws exist even in more modern protocols that people have proposed. And this kind of attack, these kinds of problems appear over and over again, where you have some kind of crypto weaknesses in some old versions, which then affect new versions. There are logical protocol flaws, and then there are implementation bugs. So, and importantly, we find that vulnerabilities in corner cases of the protocol, which you don't really think of when you're actually designing the protocol, but actually appear over time or are needed for some implementation details, are the places where often these bugs start appearing. Okay, and the observation is that in protocols like TLS, there are far too many modes and far too many corner cases that we can do a best effort, but I think it's almost impossible to cover all of these by hand. Which is why I'm going to promote the idea that we should be using automated tools and mechanized verification methods for trying to get better, higher assurance in both the protocol design and in its implementation. So the rest of the day, we'll be looking at tools that can help us, A, find the kinds of attacks that we discussed here, and B, try to prove that our protocol or its implementation or both are secure with respect to our security goals, even keeping in mind these kinds of attackers and the kind of cryptographic weaknesses that we know exist in certain modes. So that's basically the end of part 1. And I wonder if this is kind of a short thing. Should I just switch over to the next one?
Can I do that? Break now for half an hour and then take and then shorten and then have a longer and do an hour and 10 minutes within time.
I guess this might be a good time to take a break.
Take half an hour break.